They need that guy in the passing game who can really be a difference maker, and Brock Bowers, regarded as a guy who can be very special at the NFL level and a great value pick.
One of our favorite players in the pre-draft process, Jackson Powers Johnson, finally hears his name called in round 2.
Yeah, I thought he was the most dominant center I've seen come out in a long time at the University of Oregon. He's big, he's strong, he's physical. He can move those nose tackles off at the point. He's stout in pass protection. He's played guard in the past. And Tom Telesco, and I know him very well, he's staying true to his board by getting Brock Bowers, who's probably the highest player on his board, and I'm sure Jackson Powers Johnson also was there as well.
You know, you guys, I'm just going to go ahead and jump straight into the Las Vegas Raiders at this point because this team, man, really has put together a pretty solid offseason with all things considered. They not only did some great things by landing some great free agents, but they also did a pretty good job in the draft, in my opinion, with everything they were able to add. They had needs on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball, and I feel like they were able to fill those needs pretty well, which is super promising going into the upcoming season. And man, I know a lot of people aren't saying it, but when you look at this team overall, they really do look like a team that has a chance to be a lot better than people are giving them credit. But before we get into why I believe that, if you like Las Vegas Raiders content just like this, make sure to go down and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any Raiders videos for the remainder of this offseason. Okay, so to get back on topic with the Raiders, this team, of course, is coming off a season where they went 8-9 and didn't make the playoffs, which is obviously a bit disappointing. I mean, it might be a bit disappointing on paper, but to be honest with you, with everything this team had to go through, from losing their head coach to changing starting quarterbacks to everything else, including injuries, I would say 8-9 wasn't too bad of a finish. I think when Antonio Pierce came in as the head coach, no one expected anything great out of him, but to be completely honest, he was exactly what this team needed, because right when he became the head coach, we saw a complete culture shift in how this team played the game. They went from looking like they didn't care too much to looking like they were playing with their absolute hair on fire. And if I had to give a definition for Raider football, that's what I think it would be. Now, even though I think it was a great decision to sign back Antonio Pierce as the head coach, they still needed to come into this offseason to make the roster better, to make his life easier, and I think that's exactly what they've done. I think we've got to start on the offensive side of the ball, because this team, man, when it comes to the draft, absolutely blew it out of the water with who they were able to get. In the first round at pick number 13, they kind of took a surprising pick by going with Brock Bowers, an absolute freak of a tight end. A lot of people thought Brock Bowers was going to be a top 10 pick due to how talented he was, so the fact that the Raiders were able to get this guy at pick 13 is just unbelievable value. He has great size at 6'4", 240, and on top of that, he's extremely athletic, and when you watch his tape, that shows up all over it. He consistently finds ways to get open, he has great top end speed on the field, and most importantly, he is one of, if not the very best players at getting yardage after the catch in this draft at the tight end position, which is the main reason why people like him so much. He's one of those guys that you don't really have to worry about much. He's going to come in and play good right off the bat, and I don't think you can ever hate on a draft pick when they're going to do that. I know they drafted Michael Mayer last year, and a lot of people thought he was going to be their tight end of the future, but why can't you have two great tight ends on the same team where you're able to get in two tight end personnel, which could really confuse the defense with what you're going to do when you have two great tight ends on the line of scrimmage that can not only block, but also get open in the passing game. The Raiders want to have the identity of running the football down the opposing team's throat, so being able to get into two tight end sets is going to be able to help them do that at an extremely high level, so I actually love this pick a ton. I think Brock Bowers is immediately going to be a top 5 tight end in the league, and we're going to see the Raiders use a ton of play action to get him open down the field, kind of similar to how the 49ers used George Kittle. Now, moving down to the second round, we knew coming into this draft that the Raiders needed to address the offensive line, and man oh man did they do that by taking Jackson Powers Johnson at pick 44. I think by the time of the draft, it was pretty undisputed that he was the best center in this entire draft class, and just like Brock Bowers, I think he's a guy that's immediately going to come in and have an impact and play extremely well for you even as a rookie. He's going to be solid right off the bat, but at the same time, he has the upside to be an all-pro center or even an all-pro guard, and I think this pick was kind of just a no-brainer. I think you could argue that the Raiders got two of the best players in the draft in their first and second round pick, which is absolutely insane, and when you look at this offense overall now with those two guys added, it really does start to look pretty scary. You have Davante Adams as your receiver number 1, who we know is going to be a great player year in and year out. You have Jacoby Myers, who I think is one of the best receiver 2s in the entire NFL, and then you just recently went out and signed Michael Gallup to be your receiver number 3, and while he might not have had a great season last year, we've seen what he's capable of doing in previous years, so adding him as your third third option at receiver makes up a really, really good receiver room. And now that you're able to add Brock Bowers to that, it's going to make whoever ends up being the starting quarterback's life a ton easier, and it's going to make the play caller able to be a lot more creative in what they call. That's an amazing first 4 options, and then as your 5th option, you have a second-round tight end that is only going to get better going into year 2, and I just feel like this Raiders offense is going to be extremely good because of that. Especially when you consider now that JPJ is added to the offensive line, they look a ton better, and the fact that you re-signed Amir Abdullah, who I thought played pretty good in his limited snaps. You went out and you signed Alexander Madison, who's a really good power back, and in the 6th round of the draft, you went out and drafted Dylan Lobby, a running back out of New Hampshire. He's a guy that might not be the most athletic guy ever, but he's an extremely talented receiver out of the backfield, and he's also pretty good at running the football, so adding him to this running back room gives you a lot of different options to work with behind an offensive line that I'm starting to get pretty confident in. And like I said earlier on in the video, the Raiders want to make their culture run the ball down people's throats, and with Brock Bowers added, Jackson Powers-Johnson added, and Dylan Lobby added, I think they're going to be able to do that. You can then use play action off of it, and if the Raiders are able to use play action, this passing attack is going to be extremely scary. But as we all know, you don't just need an offense to win games, you also got to have a great defense, and I think the Raiders have built that out pretty well too. Of course, Antonio Pierce really did bring in his culture to this defense, and I think that's a huge plus. But you also went out in free agency and signed that guy Christian Wilkins to add on the defensive line, which makes this D-line one of the best in the entire NFL. Max Crosby is one of, if not the very best edge in the NFL right now, even if people might not tell you that. So the fact that you get to pair him with Christian Wilkins is pretty unfair in my opinion. You also have Malcolm Kuntz, who played extremely well for you last year, and you have Tyree Wilson going into his 2nd season, and we all know the upside he still has, even though he didn't use it in his rookie season much. I think this defensive line has a chance to not only be great against the run, but to also be a top 5 team in sacks, and if you can find a way to do that alone, this defense is going to be good regardless of anything else. Now, just because that'll make the defense good by itself doesn't mean you don't need to worry about everything else, and the Raiders knew that, so they went out and addressed it. At the corner position, you're still going to have Jack Jones, who I liked the addition of last year, and you also drafted a guy that I really like in the 4th round into Camryon Richardson out of Mississippi State. Richardson is extremely long and sleeky at 6'2", 195, so he has the build to be a great outside corner, and on top of that, he has all the upside in the world because he ran a 4.34 at the combine. He might be a little bit raw, which is why he dropped to the 4th round, but if you can polish this guy up a little bit, he really can become an elite corner due to all the physical traits that he has. And then to add to the secondary on top of that, you also went out and drafted Trey Taylor in the 7th round, which I thought was a pretty good pick considering what he brings to the table, and you went out and drafted another corner in the 7th round in MJ Devonshire out of Pittsburgh, who's another guy that I like a decent amount, especially if you put him in the nickel position. I think the smart thing to do later on in the draft is just draft really athletic players that showed some potential on their film, and I think that's what the Raiders were going for this entire draft. It makes me super confident that they're at least going to hit on 1 or 2 of these guys, and if they do that, this defense really does start to look good. And when you pair that with an offense with all the talent they have, this team starts to become a pretty sneaky contender in the upcoming season.